Automation versus orchestration. This is a topic that we've got to continue to make sure that you've got a really firm grasp on. So automation is focused on tasks. Automation is all about, if you want to make an analogy, it's like flipping a light switch. I can flip a light switch manually, or I can control it with an automation system. But at the end of the day, orchestration comes from being able to take all those tasks and turn them into a process. And that's why orchestration is focused on the process side. So instead of just focusing on an individual 1 or 0, on or off, I'm focused on a process itself. Why is this so important? Because these are the building blocks for workflow and really how you're going to be able to build this within UCS Director. So UCS Director's Orchestrator is built on a number of different components. So UCS tasks are part of the solution set that are already predefined. And it allows you to be able to create custom or these predefined workflows for common operational administrative tasks. What that means is you can actually build your own custom tasks or use the ones that are already built into it. And it has a very nice graphical interface you can use to basically drag and drop these tasks. There are over 1,600 predefined tasks built into it. That allows you to be able to do many of the things that are just repetitive and require a lot of different effort. You can actually take these, drag them into a custom workflow, and away you go. Or in many cases, you'll find that within the UCS Director Orchestrator, there's already a workflow set up for the kind of things that you want to do. So if you look at the workflow designer, it's built to really provide that easy graphical interface. So if this looks a lot like that workflow diagram that we showed you in previous lessons, it should, because that's how this is built. You have a start point and you have an end point, and then you have all the tasks and processes in between. Now you can get as complex as you want. You can have programmatic aspects of it where you ask for input. Based on that input, you can do different things, but it gives you that ability to be able to customize it past what you actually see here. So this is just showing you the workflow designer. When we actually go in and do a demonstration, I'll actually walk you through the process of building a custom workflow. But this is just to give you an idea of what you would be expecting. And then of course, again, all you do is just drag and drop this onto that palette, and then you just connect the different tasks together. Pretty simple. Now, when we're building a workflow requires that you take all those different tasks that we talked about, that process, and you build them within UCS Director's Orchestrator. So you can take all those complex tasks, you can combine them into a simple workflow, and that's the goal of it. Workflows can be executed on demand. In other words, you can click on a workflow and start it right there, or it can be in response to a defined trigger. So these triggers can allow you to be able to create a lot of automation or automating these workflows within your environment. So you can automate this and orchestrate it both from the physical and virtual infrastructure. And that's some of the cool capabilities you've got within UCS Director for building a workflow with automation. So tasks and workflow. So the task, again, is an action or an operation. It's the smallest point of a workflow. And when we start to think about what makes a workflow, it's basically just at its simplest, it's 2 joined tasks. So that's a very simple example of a workflow. In addition, tasks are executed in the order they're defined in the workflow itself. So the first task is going to be executed, the second one, the third, the fourth. It's really designed as that diagram that we saw before. It allows you to be able to create a very serial approach to it. The output of one task can also feed the input of another task. That means that based on the results of a task, you have the ability to be able to then execute that information into another task. So they can kind of feed each other to be able to provide more complexity or more sophistication, rather, in your workflows themselves. Triggers. So we talked a little bit about triggers before. A trigger will execute a workflow based on meeting a predefined set of conditions. And it can be stateful or stateless. This is something where it can either be something that is looking for a specific action, or it's something that can be based on a particular category. So the example here we're going to give you is resizing a virtual machine automatically if memory limit is reached. So what we're saying here is if you've got a threshold set for how much memory you're going to use, say you're going to use 80% of your memory. Anything above that, you're actually going to kick off a process to dynamically resize that virtual machine. And this is an example of how a trigger can be used. So we talked about triggers. Another aspect is activities. Activities are a way to be able to take and create that abstraction layer by separating the tasks themselves from the workflow. So it's a way to be able to have a single activity that can call multiple workflows. Why is this important? Let's look at an example real quick. Say you've got a tenant that you want to bring on board. So the process requires that you create the tenant, you prepare the host for the application, you create a volume, and then you mount a data store, and then you add a group. All these different things you're going to have to do every time you bring a new tenant on. Well, what happens if in your environment you have both EMC and NetApp storage? That means you've got two different storage environments. So do you create two different workflows associated with it? One to be able to provision NetFlow, or excuse me, a NetApp, and another one to be able to provision EMC? Well, you could do that, but another way is to use activities. And the activity is going to allow you to be able to take those two areas that are circled there, create a volume and mount a data store, and be able to use that as a way to be able to dynamically drive whether or not you're going to be provisioning to EMC or NetApp. And that's where you're going to actually be able to select which one of the volumes you want to use as part of the process, and then it will dynamically create it either on the EMC side or the NetApp side. This is where you have that ability to be able to have a task feed another task, and then being able to provide more sophistication in your actual workflow itself. So this is a way to be able to address that scenario where you've got two different storage units and you've got two different ways of being able to do it, but you only have to create one activity. Validating workflows. Validating workflows is something that's automatically done within UCS Director. You have the ability to be able to validate a workflow once you have created. So it will automatically check it to make sure everything's there. It'll check the data bindings, making sure it's getting the right information, the connections between the different elements in a workflow. So if you have a specific element that needs a certain type of information to be able to execute, it will ensure that information is getting passed from one task to another. It'll also identify a lot of those common errors that you may run into. Maybe you've got a situation where you didn't make the connection or you're not providing the right information. Whatever it is, you'll get an immediate response that will tell you what's going on in that situation. And it'll address things like mapping mismatches. It'll address mandatory fields that aren't in place for a specific task, as well as task handlers not being found or missing admin or task inputs. This is going to allow you to be able to address a lot of these different things automatically when you're creating the workflow. So you don't have to go and execute it to find out what is broken or not.